Hello, friends, and welcome to my new episode. Uh, Today's episode actually is a special one for me because it involves a filmmaker of mine who's a huge personal favorite. And I must admit that I had a lot of internal debating in my mind as I was preparing for this episode because the filmmaker in concern is such a huge favorite that when it came to picking his seven favorite films, I was really conflicted and torn as to which films to leave out from that list of seven. So it's been an extremely tough choice for me, and as I always say that my list of favorite or my list of bests always undergo changes because they're so mood dependent and they're so dependent of the time when I'm making such a list. So, that's where it is. And the filmmaker in concern is actually not just a filmmaker, he's a lot more than that. He's a story writer, he's a lyricist, he's a poet, and he's none other than the wonderful Gulzar Saab. And in today's episode, I'll be talking about seven of my favorite Gulzar movies. As I said, it's been very, very difficult for me to pick only seven from his vast work, which is mostly peppered with some absolute gems. But, despite the difficulties, I managed to pick up seven of my most favorite Gulzar films and share those with you. The first film I want to talk about is the 1973 film Achanak, and to me it is perhaps Gulzar Saab's single most underrated movie. Achanak is an absolute gem of a movie which, for whatever reasons, has been missed out by people in large. Achanak came at a time in Gulzar Saab's career when he was just evolving as a filmmaker and he was making his name. He had three movies released before Achanak. Mere Apne, his wonderful debut, Parichay, the lovely musical, and Koshish. So he had these three movies and he was already well known and gaining reputation as a fine filmmaker. And that's the time when Gulzar Saab chanced upon a story by Khwaja Ahmed Abbas, K.A. Abbas, a story called The 13th Victim. And he loved the story, and he went to producer N.C. Sippy, who had produced his earlier films as well. And he said, I want to make this movie. And the rights were bought from Abbas Saab, and the movie was made, and what a wonderful movie it turned out to be. The story of a comatose army major awaiting treatment, awaiting medical help to get better, only to be sent to the gallows for murdering his wife and her lover. Achanak is a fantastic film with some brilliant performances by Vinod Khanna as Major Ranjit Khanna, and ably supported by a host of wonderful actors ranging from Om Shiv Puri and Iftikhar to Lily Chakravarti and Farida Jalal, who all essayed their roles brilliantly. Achanak, from outside, may seem like a slightly different movie made by Gulzar because it has this army backdrop and supposedly an action feel to it, whereas in reality, in depth, Achanak is quintessential Gulzar because it talks about human relationships and it talks about it's poetic. It's absolutely poetic, despite the theme. And Achanak, I think, got a lot of critical acclaim at the time it released, but it was not a very typical commercial film because it didn't have any songs, which is quite amazing for the time period, for 1973, for the 70s, for a movie to have no songs in it was something quite unusual. and hence I'm not sure Achanak did too well at the box office, although it did receive a lot of critical acclaim. But over the years, when one talks about Gulzar movies, Achanak is inexplicably missed out for whatever reasons. To me, it remains one of his best works, Achanak. The next film I want to talk about was made by Gulzar Saab in 1982, and it is perhaps the only full-fledged comedy that Gulzar Saab has ever made, and it is the wonderful, wonderful Angur, a beautiful movie. It's based on William Shakespeare's Comedy of Errors, but the screenplay was originally written by Gulzar Saab for a Bimal Rai production in 1968, and the movie was Do Duni Char, starring Kishore Kumar and Asit Sen. Do Duni Char didn't do very well, but when Gulzar Saab started working on Angur, he was going through an uncertain phase in his life because his last two films hadn't done well, and they were his own productions. Kinara was a film that was widely appreciated, but didn't do the kind of business it was expected to do. Kinara was just about an average grosser, and his next film, Kitab, flopped very badly. So Gulzar Saab was really in an uncertain phase when he decided to rework on the screenplay of Do Duni Char and improve it, because he himself hadn't been very satisfied with his original screenplay. And that's how Angur was born. And as I said earlier, it's perhaps the only out-and-out comedy Gulzar has made. And it is one of the best comedies to hit Indian screen. It's one of the finest comedies on Indian screen, Angur. And it's the kind of cinema that Gulzar Saab is really known for. Even its comedy is subtle and really is situational and depends on the actor's comic timing mainly. And what better actors to have than the great Sanjeev Kumar and Deven Verma to essay the lead roles, and they were absolutely fabulous, as was Maushmi Chatterjee and Deepti Naval in their roles. And Angur is one of the finest comedies, as I said, on Indian screen, and a great movie by Gulzar. The next movie on my list is again from the early stages of Gulzar Saab's life, and it was, I think, his third film, the wonderful, wonderful Koshish. As far as I remember reading somewhere, Koshish was based on a Japanese film. I don't remember the name of the movie, but it was adapted beautifully by Gulzar Saab. He wrote the story and screenplay, and Koshish is absolutely, it stands on the performance of its main protagonists, Sanjeev Kumar and Jaya Bhaduri, who put in wonderful, wonderful performances as the mute and deaf couple who form a relationship, who have a relationship, and it's the story of their life, it's the story of their journey in life, and the trials and tribulations they go through, and the way they live their life. It's an absolutely outstanding movie, very heartwarming, very touching, and in a movie where the main protagonists don't have a dialogue to say, it just is so performance driven. Just a look, an expression, a touch of the hand, and boy oh boy, Sanjeev Kumar and Jaya Bhaduri, absolutely fabulous. Another wonderful movie by Gulzar Saab, Koshish. The next movie I want to talk about came in 1975 and got embroiled in a lot of controversy. It was a time when the country was going through an emergency, and a lot of things happened which really one can't explain now. And one of the things that happened was this movie was banned because it was apparently based on the life of the then Prime Minister of India. But I do not know how far that is true or relevant. But to me, Andhi is one of Gulzar Saab's finest movies. It had Bengali superstar Suchitra Sen in the lead role with, of course, Gulzar Saab's favorite actor Sanjeev Kumar, and they both were magnificent. They were absolutely magnificent in this movie. Andhi is also another great example of Gulzar Saab's wonderful creative association with Rahul Dev Burman, R.D. Burman, because a large part of the brilliance of Andhi also lies in its music, and there was some absolutely superlative music in Andhi. It's a story of a couple who drifts apart and gets separated due to different ambitions of the man and the woman. And although they realize they have no ways to meet again, it's just at a certain crossing in life their paths cross all over again. And this movie beautifully captures that moment in time, that brief period when their paths do cross again after years. And it's a fantastic take on human relations, as always, by Gulzar Saab. A huge favorite of mine, Andhi, starring Sanjeev Kumar and Suchitra Sen. The next movie I want to talk about, again, was released in the same year as Andhi, and this time it's based on a novel by A.J. Cronin called The Judas Tree, and it's the wonderful and evocative Mossam, starring Sanjeev Kumar and Sharmila Tagore. And when we see Sanjeev Kumar in a Gulzar Saab movie, we know exactly what to expect. You know, fine, nuanced, mature, sensitive performance, which is what Sanjeev Kumar has always delivered. But to me, the revelation in Mossam was Sharmila Tagore. She was absolutely brilliant in this movie. And, yet again, a fine example of the musical sensibilities of Gulzar Saab. Most of his collaborations in movies was with R.D. Burman, but Mossam was one of the few times that he worked with Madan Mohan. And what music Mossam had! Absolutely amazing music. The poetry, the lyricism, so brilliantly translated into some absolutely wonderful music by Madan Mohan, which adds to the charm and appeal of Mossam. It's a quiet film. It's a gem of a film, and to me, it's a great example of the sensitivity and the finesse that Gulzar Saab had as a filmmaker, still has. Just the fact that he doesn't make movies anymore. He's mostly into writing lyrics and short stories and poems. But the finesse of Gulzar Saab as a filmmaker is really, really very, very evident in a movie like Mossam. A brilliant movie. That leaves with my top two, and as I always say, that my lists are in random order, and there's no particular order. But when it comes to the final two, they are usually my most favorite and second most favorite. So my top two is always in order. I've spoken about 5 films so far, which are all-time favorites. There are so many other films of Gulzar Saab which I have not mentioned, like Khushbu and Kinara, Kitab, the unreleased and so eagerly awaited Libas, which I've not mentioned, I've not spoken about. But here are my final 2 movies, my top 2 Gulzar movies in order. And at number 2 is the brilliant Ijazat, starring Nasiruddin Shah, Rekha, and the magnificent Anuradha Patel in perhaps the role of her lifetime. Ijazat is a huge favorite. It's based on a short story by Subodh Ghosh, the Bengali writer, and it's a huge favorite. I mean, I really don't know how to explain what I feel for Ijazat, because that's the thing about Gulzar Saab's cinema, that it's something that needs to be experienced. It's something that needs to be felt, and it's unless you're a Gulzar Saab, you cannot adequately articulate it, and so I feel at a loss of words when I have to describe what I feel for Ijazat. It's one of my all-time favorite movies. Brilliant performances by Nasiruddin Shah, Rekha, and of course Anuradha Patel in what I said was a career-defining and career-best performance. And the movie again, like so many of Gulzar Saab's movies, is a combination of screenplay, writing, acting, poetry, lyrics, great music. Ijazat had only 4 songs, but they were wonderful songs, absolutely beautiful songs, all enhancing the mood of the movie all the more, and elevating it to further heights. You know, so this is Ijazat, my number 2 Gulzar movie of all time. And that leaves me with the last movie, which is my all-time favorite movie. Again, this movie came at a time when Gulzar Saab had success with Angur. Angur had released and had been a whopping success. So he found his confidence again to make the kind of movies he wanted. And this time he chose a story by Bengali author Somoresh Boshu, a story called Okal Boshanto, and he translated that into the wonderful and gorgeous Namkeen. And to say that it's my favorite Gulzar movie is really not saying enough. It is perhaps one of my most favorite movies of all time, period, by any filmmaker. Namkeen is this huge personal favorite. It's a subtle, richly layered movie. Again, to be felt, to be experienced, and very rarely can it be adequately spoken about. But Namkeen is a brilliant movie. It charts the relationship of this truck driver, Gerulal, and the 4 women he interacts with, the 4 women he meets. Jugni, the old, almost senile mother, and her 3 daughters, Chinky, Mithu, and Nimki, living in their dilapidated house where Gerulal comes to stay for a few days, and the bond and the relationship he forms with each one of them is what Namkeen is about. It's a story about human life and human interactions and relationships. And as I said, it's richly layered. It's got a lot of subtle, it's complex at one level, and yet at another level, it's so heartwarming and so humane. And it's another one of those experience it rather than talk about it movies. And undoubtedly my favorite Gulzar film of all time, Namkeen. Again, great music by R.D. Burman, some superb songs, wonderfully picturized, beautifully worded songs. I mean, the moment I think of Namkeen, I just have to shut my eyes and Phir Se Aayo Badra Bidesi comes to my mind. It's so beautifully shot on Shabana Azmi. And only Gulzar Saab can write characters like that, of a mute girl who writes poetry, and such brilliant poetry. And you've got to see Namkeen to experience its brilliance. It's no use me talking about it because I really won't do a good job of it. But as I said, it's my favorite Gulzar movie of all time, Namkeen. Do watch it if you haven't. So that's it for this episode. I hope you've most of you would have seen almost all the 7 movies that I've spoken about. As I said, there are so many other Gulzar movies which are wonderful and not in my list, like Kinara and Khushbu and Parichay and Mere Apne, and his later movies like Machis and Meera, and of course the unreleased Libas, which is on everyone's wish list to see if ever it gets released. It's perhaps one of his most eagerly awaited and anticipated movies, and we all live in the hope that someday Libas will find release. Anyway, but I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I really enjoyed speaking about Gulzar Saab and my love for his movies. And I hope, in case a few of you haven't seen some of the movies I've mentioned, do watch them. They're easily available on YouTube and some of the OTTs. They're quite easily available. Do watch them if you haven't. And that's it for this episode. Until the next time, bye for now.